So I'm very excited today to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Philip Thigo. Ambassador Philip Thigo is a renowned technology and public policy expert, although he went to Princeton. I went to Harvard. That's okay. He's the Special Envoy for Technology for the Republic of Kenya and the Founding Director for Africa at the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. He's also somebody I now consider a good friend and mentor and somebody who calms me down. So, Philip, welcome to our podcast, Legacy of Purpose.
Thank you so much,
wonderful to have you with us, and I'm excited to get your thoughts and your story out to our audience. The first question I want to ask you is, you have had this remarkable career that is really at this intersection of technology and public policy and public service. And from your time as executive director of Infonet Africa, that was like over a decade ago, and your current roles that you have right now, I mean, the truth is, if you wanted to, you could have actually pursued a career that was way more lucrative in the private sector, but you pushed to take this path of service and doing good in the world, and always having meaning at the center of the work that you do. That's probably not by accident.
No.
And that usually comes from where we come from in terms of our family, in terms of our upbringing, the values that were instilled in us. So can you share with us the values that drove you to pursue such a unique career path that has impact at its core, when you could have really joined the corporate sector and made a lot of money and worked in the technology space, frankly, but instead you're thinking about how to bring technology into the public sector?
Thank you so much, Dina, of course. Of course, I met you a year ago, and this is sort of kindred spirit. I think is the first conversation I'm having with on this sort of reflection from where I came from. I think early in our lives, right? So a lot of us always try to find meaning. And in most cases, you sort of have these options in terms of certain paths that you need to take. I think for me, I've always been a product of generosity. And so I think that really informed my choice in terms of a career pathway, because we may think these are coincidences, but generosity kind of guides you in certain directions. And I have not regretted since. I basically was brought up in Kibera. Kibera is one of the slums in Kenya. And I've seen people who I grew up with. And I've seen the potential outcomes if I did not take some certain steps or some certain paths to where I am today. And so part of the values that I had for me and the values that I was seeing, one is generosity. And you have to give not because you have extra. You have to give of yourself with what you have. Because I think sometimes we sort of assume you only give because you can have a lot of things to spare. And so it's been an amazing journey. And many times I look at my friends who went into corporate because I was not in technology myself. I mean, we were a big cohort. And many of them are not happy. Right? So yes, you have money, but then you're still struggling to find meaning. And so for me, taking this pathway of giving back and in Africa, the giving back, you really have to be in public service.
Yeah.
Because it's a thankless job. So you don't do it to be thanked. You do it because you're giving. Anyway.
But where did that idea of generosity come from? Like when I think, my mom always used to say, if you can help somebody, help no matter what it is. If there's something you can do to help and somebody asks you, you always do it. And that has kind of guided my life. And I often hear her voice in my head.
I'm like you, same thing.
Yeah.
The problem is I had a grandmother and a mother. So both of them were, well, it's kind of annoying, right? So sometimes they come and say, I do not have X. You buy them the X. The next time they're like, you want to buy me another one? I said, so where did that go? Oh, somebody came and I saw they didn't have, so I had to give them what I had. So basically these things kind of creep up on you, right? So that's our mothers. That's my
whatever they have, they give.
They give. And so, because so you work, I have you could always buy me, but they don't have anybody. And women, honestly, and this is quite interesting, that women have always shaped my career. When I came out of school, there's a lady, Dr. Corinne Kumar, I remember, she got me out of the UN. I was volunteering for something. And again, it was quite interesting. So when you ask, I would have been in corporate or not in civil society. It was quite interesting because she was a sociologist.
Yeah.
But then she could see what I could do with technology. And then at my I was like 22 or 23. And her point was, what if I would ask you to do something that was out of the ordinary? And I said, what is it? He said, listen, it was quite interesting. And this was in New York during the Commission on the State of CSW March. It was the first time I saw snow. That's another story. But she put $1,300 on the table. That was my job interview.
$1,300.
$1,300.
And then what did you do with those $1,300?
$1,300 was like, listen, I run this organization. Nelson Mandela is the president. So that was, of course, a hook. I'm African. Come on, Mandela. You don't have to say anything else. We have 3 offices, Bangalore, Cape Town, Geneva, HQ in Tunisia. This $1,300 can get you to those 4 destinations. If you think you want to proceed with what you're doing now, take the $1,300 and just do something with it. But if you want to do something different, whenever you're ready, take a flight and come. So that's what happened.
And you went to
and
which
I went
city?
to Tunisia, right? So
you went to Tunisia.
Tunisia was different. So of course, it's so funny. Again, back to my mother. Came to Nairobi with the $1,300, and me and my mom are looking at the $1,300, right? So you can see us. You can imagine the picture, right?
What do I do with the $1,300?
So 2 of us are like, but there's school fees to pay here. There's something to do there. Just looking at this $1,300. They're like, listen, if somebody asks you to do this, it's not a coincidence. My mother was always, I do not believe in coincidences. So
nothing happens by chance.
Nothing happens by chance. So went to Tunis. That's how I speak Arabic. It was different. And my life has never been the same.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how certain things happen and push you in certain directions.
Yeah.
And somehow you found yourself as the special envoy for technology for your country, Kenya.
Yeah.
Now, as a part of that role, you've been asked to be bold and to disrupt. What does that mean in a country that is also struggling from an educational perspective when it comes to math and science and the overall performance of math and science? Because like many of us, from a lot of the markets, I come from Egypt. Yeah. And I love my country. I know that you love your country. But we also have to be constructive in what needs to change in our countries and how we critique them. So how do you think Kenya and other governments across growth markets, Africa, Latin America, Asia, Middle East, how do you think all of our markets should examine and address some of the broken systems or policies that we have that are inhibiting our ability to truly innovate and grow?
Got it. I mean, so the role of a special envoy of technology, and this is something I credit His Excellency the President in this, is having a vision that then begins to understand the role of technology in transformation. Is because the current architecture, unless you begin to will technology, then you sort of have a lot of challenges. Because one thing you realize that our development historically has been resource intensive.
Yeah.
And the resource intensive are the things that you're mentioning, right? So as much as we have raw material or how do I say it? The hardware of development, we've not had the capability to sort of turn to manufacture, right? To sort of transform it into goods, or in sort of the consumer goods or things that people can consume. It's always being done somewhere else.
No, but
Exactly.
We've been put in this box of
produce. We produce what you don't consume and consume what you don't produce, right? So that's always the African narrative, right?
We send our cocoa, and then we eat it from another.
Send our coffee, then we
from
buy
another
Nescafe.
country. I mean, let's be honest. That's the overall state of this continent has been a place of extraction.
That's true, and think about it, and its legacy of colonialism, right? So you need something different. Right. And you need something disruptive. And that's why the boldness comes in. Of course, it makes many people uncomfortable because the discomfort comes from losing power. Because it's one thing to have a system that continues to ensure that the African continent is that provider of labor or raw material, and not necessarily an African continent that can harness its labor, harness the raw material for its development, but also serve the world, right? So that's been our legacy. And so the boldness you need is to confront that burden of history. And so I think having somebody like me, I have a colleague who's on climate, then you begin to sort of send a signal that we know, right? Because knowledge is important. The second thing is that we are doing something about it. And we are being very deliberate. So
what are you doing? Tell us what you're doing.
So first thing, of course, is making sure we are very much on the table. Because if you're not on the table, as it said, you're on the menu.
On all conversations.
On all conversations. Secondly is that we don't come as Kenya. We come as the continent, because that's always been the problem, divide and rule, right? So we are all divided in Anglophone, Lusophone, Francophone, and all the phones. So that's our joke.
Sub-Saharan, North.
Exactly, North, MENA. No, we never said this. Who said we are MENA, Well, and so, exactly. So it's been a tactic to divide us and not to see ourselves as one cohesive unit. A lot of our infrastructure is extractive. Our rail was never built for an internal network. It was built to go to the coast. This is the African story. All roads go to the coast and to remove. So we don't necessarily build infrastructure. Exactly.
Not to connect.
Not to connect internally.
Yeah.
And so basically that's what also we are doing in terms of, you see when I'm talking about technology and sort of the fundamental infrastructures for AI, whether it's compute. How do we do compute that we can work ourselves? How do we fiber intra-Africa, not the fibers that are coming and landing into the coast? That's
right.
Fine. But then how do we ensure that we can have our internal connectivity to the last mile?
Yeah. I love this. The idea of how do we build not for extraction, but for connection is such a powerful thing. But, let's go back to this idea of AI, because, you're one of, you're an ambassador, but you're also an ambassador for AI, and you were appointed to this special committee by the UN Secretary General around how AI can do good for our societies. But for advanced technology like AI, generative AI is evolving at an extremely fast pace. And, when I hear people talk about AI, and I have, there's a professor at MIT who's phenomenal, always says, AI can transform systems. Depending on how we use it, it can help us leapfrog and address some of these broken systems that we have, whether it be in agriculture, education, or healthcare. Now, my question to you is, now we see this new wave of people in Africa talking about AI can transform, but there are certain realities still.
Yep.
Right? There are certain realities in our systems that need to be addressed, which is we can't really make use of AI without the right infrastructure.
And I agree.
A big part of Africa still doesn't have access to the grid. So they don't have access to electricity. A big part of Africa is still not being educated, or if they're being educated, they're not being educated well, and they are not digital literacy continues to lag behind. People talk about Kenya. They say, Kenya, it's the most digitally connected country. It is, but in reality, it's not.
Yeah.
Right? It's not. So very clear items, what needs to change in order for Africa as a whole to really embrace AI as a pathway to leapfrogging into economic agency that would prevent the extraction and allow for connection?
Got it. So I think the first thing that I always say, and that's why it is important to be sort of on the table, is when I got appointed by the United Nations Secretary General. The first thing was to think about sort of one of 6 Africans on the table, potentially just 2 of the 6 Africans who actually live in the continent, to be in this advisory body. The first conversation, of course, is how do we define AI from an African perspective? Because there's, of course, a dominant sort of narrative around what AI is, and many people come into this space from a very nuanced geopolitical perspective, right? So for me, that's the first point, is we should not, and nobody should define what AI is to Africans.
As in, the first step is to define what it means
to us, right? It's not about self-driving cars. It's not about vanity. It's about what can we do with this technology to advance us and our continent. I think for me, that needs to be the game changer.
So then, let's say we do that.
Yeah. So
then
the second
what do we do?
So the second part means then...
So we say as Africa, this is what advanced technology means to us in our countries. Now, what systems do we need to change for this
Which
to
is what
thrive?
I'm getting into. So then that then begins to determine your investments, right? Then you begin to prioritize, to say, listen, at least the sort of the critical infrastructure for artificial intelligence, right? Whether it's talent, and you mentioned that in terms of STEM and how you build the pipeline, whether it's data in terms of how we
build our
data capabilities, our data ecosystems, and then the compute, how we invest in that, and then of course the algorithms piece in terms of how we ensure that we will produce, right? Because you remember the others are still raw material. We still need to manufacture it. And for me, the algorithms are the sort of the products that we need to use to sort of then begin to address the challenges that we have. So if we invest in the 4, then we begin to take... Infrastructure, I think for me, I put it around the compute, because compute is layered, right? From data centers to electricity, because as you know, compute just sucks up energy. So we need to ensure that our energy...
Why is Morocco the only place that has that capability right now?
I think historically, right? So if you look at Morocco historically, because of proximity to Europe, you sort of had sort of early sort of investments in broadband. They had ADSL for those of you who are some of us as old as we are.
Don't tell our age. You and I are the same age. Don't share. We look young.
I still don't have white hair.
Yeah, well, I do.
Or I color my beard if I had. But I think basically, so some countries, just because of proximity, and Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, so those North African countries, just because of proximity to Europe, have been able to adopt these technologies in early stage. I mean, this is not new. I lived in Tunis. We had good connectivity. That's where we had the World Summit of Information Society in 2005. We had a very solid sort of education system. They have amazing engineers in that part of the world.
We do.
And across in terms of human capital when you look at that. So I think, but you can see, those are the core investments, and you said, so part of human agency is actually investing in people, right? And so if we can define what AI is to us, then it means we will put money in what matters.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I agree to build roads, but the roads are not the infrastructure of the future. We need, yes, to build roads, but also prioritize connectivity, prioritize talent in terms of data scientists and machine learning experts, but also the many disciplines that then are the disciplines of the future plus AI.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you have obsolete education systems that produce learners who are not fit for the market. And so you just have this, this sort of mill that churns out people who cannot then...
Yeah. And I mean, you and I were educated in the US, and it's a great privilege. But in the US, there's such a huge investment in R&D. We have the infrastructure for R&D, on any of the universities that you and I went to, whether it be Princeton, Harvard, or where I'm teaching, where I am now at MIT being the lead, obviously, in that, the infrastructure, the labs exists to do that R&D. How many universities in Africa have that capability? Not many. And how many governments on the continent are actually investing the right percentage of their GDP back into R&D that is required for us to start building our own innovation capacity?
I get it. And if you see, and part of this is, I think, it's a design challenge. I have colleagues who really emphasize on this particular piece. Again, tying it to colonial legacy, because part of sort of decolonization must also be dismantling the colonial architecture. Because yes, you can be emancipated, you can get independence, but then if you do not deconstruct that infrastructure, I think it's a Nigerian poet who said, the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. And so if we don't also deconstruct these tools, then it doesn't make sense. And that's why I think if you see in Kenya, for example, the president has been very adamant in terms of reforming the education system, because you cannot inherit this system that is built to subjugate.
No, but you can reform education. We've seen it happen so many times in Africa.
That's the point,
Let us reform education. They reform curriculum.
But that's incremental,
But then
right?
you have to reform the teachers and the entire system of education. And that's where technology...
And that's where the models come, right? So,
yeah.
And I mean, it's, again, master's tools, right? So you copy what the master is doing, right? So do a little bit of, replication, right? So it's working there, so we replicate it. Of course, we know how that goes. Or we do incremental, which is reforms. Or you can be bold and totally do a differentiated model. And for us, a differentiated model needs to be an African model. And the African model needs to also understand where the world is right now, that if we have the youngest population, if we have all the raw materials, including 60% of arable land, if we have now a very educated African population, they're not many, but at least we have a critical mass. We have a middle class. We didn't have this before.
No, we definitely have, yep.
We have industries now. We have companies now that are here. Why can't we, to your connected story, harness this collective capability, make it connected to start to deliver for the continent, so that the continent then aspires to what the continent should be? Because it seems like everybody sees our value, we don't.
Well, that was by design.
That's my point. Right? So how do we shift this mental model?
I mean, it sounds like what you're describing on some level is utopia, but in my mind, it sounds like you're describing Africa pre-colonial times. I just released a paper that I co-wrote with one of our fellow alum, who's from Senegal. Her name is Khadija Ba. And, she and I, we thought a lot about the African narrative. And, I'm Egyptian. Oftentimes people deny me my African heritage because somehow during colonial times, there was us up here and everyone down here, and we know what that divide was about. And it was about skin color. It had nothing to do. But the reality is we are one Africa. And when it comes to the African narrative, it's still one African narrative.
Yeah.
And that often comes with a lot of negative connotations. And she and I spent quite a bit of time looking at African history, pre-colonial times. And, we saw, if you looked at maps, pre-colonial times, the trade routes, Africa was this beautiful, open continent with trade happening in every direction. And Egypt, the science and the innovation that came out of my country, or mathematics was born on this continent. Medicine, science, it was always a part of who we were. And then colonial times came, and somehow we found ourselves trapped in this narrative of scarcity and dependence and less than. And that was by design, so that the extraction could continue. I mean, we're being very bold and controversial here. And I know some people won't like what we have to say. But the reality is, I hear you. And I say, when you talk about technology and we have to be bold and we have to really think about, in order for technology to transform Africa, it also requires that governments and citizens stop saying things like, we're broke. We don't have the ability to invest in the right infrastructure, that scarcity mindset, or we won't be able to do it. There's this kind of, limit. We're not good enough.
Yeah.
But the reality is we do have the talent, and a lot of our talent is supporting what is happening in the United States or Europe or other advanced economies. And also, we're not thinking about how to look inwards and say, there's talent in Egypt, there's talent in Kenya, there's talent in Nigeria, there's talent in Ghana, there's talent in Tanzania, in South Africa. How do we take all that talent and use it and share that talent for the greater good and for the greater good of Africa? So my question to you is how, because you always talk about Africa, you say Kenya, but then you say Kenya is only as good as the rest of Africa in our ability to really connect and start trading with each other. But, you know, in the end, it sounds like you're saying this is all about mindset.
Yes, it's totally about mindset, right?
And culture.
It's mindset is culture, but and this is the point, right? So and it's good you mentioned sort of the rich history we had, whether it's the library in Alexandria or Timbuktu or Songhai or the Mali. You know, we had city-states before anybody else had it, right?
Mathematics was created out of Mali.
Exactly. So I think for me, remember, until there was sort of a defined formal process that valorizes knowledge, all of a sudden civilizations became stupid, right? Because then a certain people defined, all of a sudden overnight created a yardstick.
But if we were stupid, why did
right?
they want our material?
But that's the point, right? So it's to create a yardstick that then they understand it, so that all of you have to measure up to that yardstick. So then that yardstick then is what valorizes whether you know or you don't know, right? So for me, and that's the boldness, right? So the point that Africans now should be talking about, and that's where technology comes in, is we can actually create a yardstick on our own. That's what leapfrogging is. That's what we've done with mobile telephones. That's what we've done with mobile payment. We've created a yardstick, right? So as much as you have, M-Pesa, right? So as much as you talk about financial inclusion, we are challenging the notion of financial inclusion in your model, because your model financial inclusion is having a bank account.
And we were the first people to say, you don't need to go to a bank.
Exactly. Right?
That happened here.
Exactly.
In Kenya.
And that is the thing. So it has been
done. But
that
narrative is not being used.
Of course. And because, and again, to your mental challenge is that because we're not built to praise or to talk about ourselves. We're just not built that way. And that's a struggle in this world that you really have to articulate.
We're built to think it was an exception.
Exactly, right? It's one, oh my God,
created,
it was happenstance, right?
It opened up this whole space for fintech and digital banking and how to use a phone. Right?
Oh my God, it's to transfer phone. Oh my God, it's
money.
A feature phone.
That all happened here before it happened anywhere else.
That's the thing, right?
Right? And but I think it was seen as like, oh, that was like a fluke.
Yeah. It's happenstance. So I think again, and it's something that you keep on mentioning, is that we need to have more conversations.
Yeah.
Because part of having these conversations is affirmation, and we need to affirm ourselves. I don't need anybody else to come and affirm us. To break these barriers. And that's what technology has done. Before, I mean, it's ridiculous that it's more expensive to travel in the continent
than out of the continent. Oh my God, I hear you.
That's the point, right? So
it's so hard to get to different places. It's like by design.
Right? Yes, it's ridiculous.
Keep us separated. Right? We need to address this.
That's the thing, right? So, but see, technology does that. We can be inspired, and it's easier to build that digital infrastructure than build the old infrastructure. Imagine building an airport, then getting planes to run, then getting planes to sort of land, than just, because people to people is already happening. Right? And we need to do this at scale. How many people can fly? We
still need airports.
We need them, but how many people can travel?
Right.
Over how many people can connect via the internet? I think for me, it's more easy to move that way in terms of digital public goods than moving people. And the more people start to connect and engage, the more we start to sort of have these affirmations. Also, the more we need to understand ourselves.
Yeah.
And language with technology now is not a barrier. I can have a quick translate. AI can quickly translate my Kiswahili and Wolof, and we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
Without a French, then English intermediary, right? So why do we have to go into those languages and not just
our own languages,
right? And that's what technology, I think, in my view, can do. But we just need to believe that we need to build those data sets. Of our own languages.
So I'm going to ask you a little bit of a controversial question, and it's about something you said yesterday to my fellows, and because yesterday we talked a lot about geopolitics, I, as Dina, I have this like incredible obsession with economic sovereignty and the need for entrepreneurship to be our pathway to creating economic agency and less dependency on those who've historically extracted from the continent. But I feel like you have a different fear, which is that advanced technology can be another tool to keep us colonized.
Yes,
and
it can.
You use a term called, I think, technological sovereignty.
Yeah.
That must have been on your mind for a while. What is your big concern?
It does. So if you think about the first, second, third industrial revolution, right? So
we're in the fourth revolution right now. This is our moment. If we don't...
Thank you. And so if you look at the pattern, right? So the pattern is Africans have always been the raw material or providing the raw material. That's right. Either labor or just from earth, right?
Diamonds, cocoa, coffee,
right?
cotton.
Exactly. So in the fourth industrial revolution, unless we disrupt that pattern, then there's a problem. It's happening now, right? So from coltan to rare earth minerals, to green minerals, it's happening, right? And then to people, we are still the youngest population, so it means it's happening even in AI in terms of annotation or labeling, right? So the value is still, and I don't want to name companies, but a Kenyan here, and we know this, through a BPO is paid about $200 for labeling for a company that is a multi-billion-dollar company. So again, right? So it's been in my head in terms of technological sovereignty, which means if all the raw material is here, including the labor, which is the young people, then we need to start to shift in a way that we become the creators of the technology. And unless we do that, we'll be perennial subscribers and users of tech. And unless we do it now, so I always talk about beyond agency, there's urgency. If we don't do it now, then the foundations are being set at this time. So there's an urgency.
Very little time.
We have very little
to
time
turn this around.
Exactly. And so to your point, we need it's an all-in effort. That's what I keep on saying. We need governments
and we need
to
leadership.
Come in. We need leadership. We need private sector folks. We need people to make hard decisions.
Yeah.
To sort of, because I think for me, I always tell people, it will be a short time that we need to sacrifice.
Yeah.
For all of us to come in to ensure that when the foundations are being set, they're being set in a way that we have a rightful place.
So short-term loss for long-term gain.
Long-term gain. That's the thing.
Yeah. That's another mindset shift that needs to happen here, right? Because we're so conditioned to think short-term.
And me, right? So it's also silo, right? So, I mean, we have pressures. I'm not saying that people don't have, economic pressures. People don't, bills still have to be paid.
But the pressures are there anyway.
Yeah.
And I think if we don't take action now, we're going to end up in an even worse situation, right? Progress needs to be made, but it needs to be made in a very different way now. And, the question I have is that, you and I both share this common dream of Africa, achieving economic agency and the exponential growth of the private sector. And we talk about that. And we want to see entrepreneurs across the continent scaling their ventures in the continent. I personally want to stop seeing entrepreneurs leave to go scale elsewhere. And that's part of why we created the Foundry Fellowship, is to create this community of African entrepreneurs who are invested in this continent, who will help each other scale to each other's countries, and who will create ecosystems that are strong and vibrant and integrated. So to be able to have an entrepreneur in Africa connect their ecosystem in Cairo to Nairobi, to Johannesburg, to Lagos is something we've never had before. And for us to think about our entrepreneurs scaling internally on this continent is also new. But having said that, we also want to see these entrepreneurs be innovation driven.
Exactly.
And that means that, because you and I know Africa is a net consumer of technology and innovation right now. We are a net consumer. And we want to become a major exporter of innovation over the next 2 decades, as our population grows and stays young, in about 25 years, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African.
African, yes.
So we don't have the luxury of continuing to be net consumers. We have to build now. So what needs to change? Like, what specifically needs to change across Kenya and across our entire continent for us to start becoming net exporters of innovation, for this continent to be competing with the United States and Europe and other advanced economies when it comes to innovation that solves major global challenges?
The species you mentioned, right? So one is, of course, is this whole creation of industry, right? So we don't, and I say this with a lot of humility, and I tell people that we have to be honest with ourselves. We really don't have a technology. We don't have that industry yet. We have pieces of it. We have innovators here and there, but then we don't have industry. It needs to be cohesive because we need to do this at scale. And to build industry, and I'll come back to this, is we need to invest in what matters. I agree that we are within fiscal constraints. I agree that a lot of the African countries are in a debt burden. Kenya is not an exception. But then if we were to invest the little money that we have for developmental expenditure around creating these industries, it means we can turn this debt burden around very quickly, right? Which means same things you're mentioning. How do we put money into R&D, right? Because unless our decisions are driven by data, then my president says it, then it's guesswork, right? And we cannot be guessworking our future when somebody is being very deliberate, because we are working against forces and tensions that are not sleeping, because future economies will be determined by who owns technology.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. It too is determining the future of power. And power is not given.
Power is claimed. You and I know that. Power is always
not
claimed.
Given. So invest in R&D, invest in talent, invest on the infrastructure of the future. You are right. 27% of this region, only 27% is connected to the internet. People think it's a lot of people. It's just that we have a few Philips who are loud. We have a few people who are very loud mouths, right?
A few of us loud people.
Very loud people, and all of a sudden people think it's 100%. It is not. So how do you ensure that the entire continent is connected? I mean, I was given a figure yesterday that kind of had me worried that 900,000 Kenyans are graduating from high school this year. 900,000.
Yeah, that's not far. I mean, Egypt is not. I think in my country, the co-founder of my company also has an education company. He says, and he always says to me, Egypt is under enormous pressure to be able to provide higher education institutions to the sheer number of people who are going to be graduating.
It's a fire hose. It's like a fire hose. It's like 900,000. Somebody's putting a fire hose on you. And so I think those are the pieces, right? So we need to think about, where do the 900,000 go every year, right? And unless we build that pipeline, on pathways, right? So pathways in terms of meaningful sort of career paths, then that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I think finally for me is that, and I cannot overemphasize this, and what technology can do, Dina, really for me, is to redefine Pan-Africanism, right? Because Pan-Africanism, in my view, and part of our bringing, we're lucky, and unlike the current generation, was we were lucky to sort of in our early days to have seen what Pan-African was, in terms of when a continent comes together to say, we will work together to emancipate every state. Right?
Yeah, and what good education used to look like. I remember my father used to say, there was a time when Cairo University,
it was a big deal.
People all over Africa would come and study at Cairo University. And,
Mali, Makerere, Ben Bella, I know these names, right? Abdel Nasser, Senghor from Senegal, Nkrumah, so we knew these folks, and they were not just names.
No.
These folks were about real action, real connectivity.
But that was real leadership.
Exactly.
They had a vision.
This is the thing.
They had a vision, and they knew that
and it wasn't about an Arab. It wasn't that I'm Egyptian. I'm a Pan-Africanist.
No,
right?
and I think there was this idea that we were never going to achieve what we wanted to achieve alone, and it needed to happen in the collective.
Exactly. So then why can't we recreate that spirit? See, that's my point. So we need a moment, right? And the moment in the 1950s and 1960s was a realization that we need the entire continent to be liberated. That's not different from now. We need the entire continent to be liberated from technology colonialism. So we need technology sovereignty.
So how do we do that?
This is the point. So we have the inspiration. First thing is we need people. It's still about people. It took a Nasser, it took a Bembela, it took a Senghor, it took a
It needs a Philip Thigo.
Those folks, right?
Philip Thigo to be there.
Why can't we find ourselves, right? Those guys found themselves without internet, we probably had phones. But imagine, even with the challenges of an colonized Africa, they found themselves.
Yeah.
We have the advantage of connectivity, mobility. Why can't we find ourselves and work for the collective good of the continent?
Yeah. It goes back again to mindset shift and culture. Exactly. All comes down to mindset shift and culture.
Back to that. So be comfortable in the US, but remember, because many of them are comfortable in Russia, comfortable in Germany, comfortable in the UK, but they're always dreaming
of home.
Right?
Oh, I'm with you there.
So I'm
with you there. There's no place like home.
It's cool.
And this continent.
And you say the continent, not just Egypt. So
no, this continent is beautiful.
Exactly.
This is our home.
So hopefully,
and we have to invest in this home. So during last year, Donovan, who is our storytelling and communication specialist, moderated a panel with you around redefining Africa's narrative. And you explained on that panel that African innovators often pursue technology not for vanity work, but to solve real complex challenges. And that is the nature of our entrepreneur. So Donovan would ask me to specifically ask you this question to share with the audience. Now, how do you unpack that? And why is that so important? But also, how do we create a movement that has these amazing entrepreneurs at the very center of it? Before I came to this podcast with you, I was in a room with Hilda, and she's a powerhouse, and my fellows who are powerhouses, and all of them were talking. They were talking about, their experience of growing a business in Africa, and in spite of the difficulties, they made it, and she had an exit, and this person had an exit, and, those stories are somehow hidden, but also these people are not connected. Mm-hmm. So we've built this Foundry Fellowship to connect these entrepreneurs together. How do we get in Africa? How do we manage to take these amazing entrepreneurs that you've talked about who are solving real complex challenge? Hilda's solving the challenge of getting money to small businesses.
Capital is always a problem.
How do we get all of these entrepreneurs across Africa to start collaborating and connecting together and really pushing for this agenda that you're talking about that would prevent us from having technology be a part of our colonial heritage?
I think, and Donovan, I think at that time it sparked something in my mind, right? Which in most cases, because I have the advantage of sort of being connected into Phoenix and sort of that ecosystem in Arizona with the ASU, but also just understanding what I see there. If you walk into downtown Phoenix, you see a self-driving car.
Yeah.
And I'm in my head, I'm like, this is fine, but what is it solving? It's not solving anything. It's just the next step of evolution. But then when I come to Kenya and I go to Eldoret, I see a self-driving tractor.
For agriculture. To create food security.
Exactly. So that's so to what I was trying to explain to Donovan is, unfortunately, we don't have a luxury to sort of build stuff just to try a technology for the next evolution of it, because that's the linear trajectory. For us, it's with our finite resources and the capabilities that we have, we really are sort of geared towards ensuring that that resource is actually fixing something. And that's the spirit of the entrepreneur in Africa. And so I think the issue for me has been, one is that how do we fix the challenge of capital? And before I came into this podcast, actually, we're having a chat with my colleagues, right, to say that, what is it that a VC in the Bay Area is seeing in an African entrepreneur that an African government is not, and that an African bank is not? Because a lot of the exits you mentioned are not local. A lot of the exits of the investments are not local investments. They're all somebody in the Bay Area. I mean, what metric are they using? And so that for me is, we need to fix that.
Yeah.
If you really, where's African money? The pension funds, the middle class.
And we know it's there.
It's there. The sportsmen. We have billionaire sportsmen. The family offices, right? So we need to begin to turn, because they're investing in something and they're investing in real estate. If you look around me, all these are pension funds building apartments and condos, right? Still investing in all the infrastructure.
Invest in people.
Invest in these young
risks.
folks. Look at the exits. They're quick. The returns are fast. And so again, to your point around mindset, is how do we turn the current capital infrastructure in Africa to believe in its own young people and to invest because somebody else is investing.
Part of that requires that we create our own public markets.
There you go. So those are the pieces that I believe we need to do, but also who's going to de-risk it, which comes to one of my roles that I think in terms of an evangelist in another way is how do I surface these innovations and using this platform, both my president and the office that he's given me, is to sort of then become that microphone, because then I don't have any bias. I'm not benefiting from it, but it's to show what is possible in the continent. My colleague and I, Kate, always talk about doing business in Africa, right? So I've not seen anybody talking to anybody around doing business in Africa, right? So those are the pieces.
My fellows are.
Exactly, but then your fellows are doing it, but then who's doing it in a more structured way, right? Because they're doing it in the very hard way. Think about it, and I always say your fellows are looking down, right? So they're busy building their
and then I come
right?
in and I make them look up.
Exactly.
And I take them to different markets on the continent,
thing, right?
And they say, oh,
exactly.
I'm a Nigerian. I've actually never been to Kenya.
But there's a piece missing. Dina does that, but Dina then has to come and start to say, oh my God, but there's no infrastructure. Oh my God. See, the fellows are ready.
But Dina,
then who's
Dina
making
does
the
say
market
that,
trade?
Dina does say,
Who's
Philip,
making the
oh my
market
God, where's the infrastructure? Oh my God, where are the airports to get people? I say this all the time.
This is a thing. So somebody, but Dina doesn't have to do that, right? So who makes or gets the continent or that part future ready? And that's where, exactly, it's government, it's private sector. It's how we understand our public-private partnership models that have to be a little bit different. Again, for me, it's an all-in effort. It has to be everybody.
Okay. I'm going to ask you another question.
Oh, God.
Because when I read your bio, there were like, all these recognitions. Philip Thigo was recognized by Mozilla for under you got the Rise 25 award 25. As one of the kind of 5 advocates leading the development of artificial intelligence ethically, inclusively, and transparently. And I've been told that transparency and openness is like very important to you.
Yeah.
But you were recently, Kenya, on the 60th Independence Day anniversary, you were awarded the Presidential Commendation for the service that you've given to this country. You've had a lot of great recognitions in your career. And I understand that, when people see you and recognize what you're doing, that can also feed your ego. And, there are not many of us out there. Exercising leadership and trying to create change is not something you see all the time, right? And then sometimes when you're recognized, it can feed your ego. But how do you put that aside and continue to stand in your purpose?
I think we've come full circle. We always forget where we came from.
Yeah.
Right. So I think for me, it's my North Star, right? My mother always said it, and that's how we started this podcast. That you have to recognize that you're a product of generosity, and if you're religious, you're a product of prayer, right?
Yeah.
So you're not. Nothing happens by design. That there's something or someone who's greater than you, and who has defined your purpose, and your purpose is higher than yourself. And so if you have that as your North Star, I don't think there's no confusion here. That it's not about you. And it's never about you. It's always understanding that that's your purpose. You never get ego because of your purpose. That's what you're supposed to do. So whether somebody recognizes you or not, it doesn't matter. So I'll not do it because I didn't get recognition. If I got recognition, it's okay. If it works for somebody else, and my colleagues will tell you, I tell them, use it. It's not for me, right? So if it helps you open a door that I got X, please take it. We have a joke in the office: take it for a test drive and see what it means, right? But for me, I don't think it doesn't, and it comes back to value.
Yeah,
right? It comes back to values.
So my last question, and because you're someone who stands strong in your purpose, and I know that you have this purpose, and everyone who's been listening hears that you have this purpose of using technology to advance Africa, but to also create technological independence and sovereignty, which is a wonderful purpose. But, we're all here for a brief moment in time. And, my late father always used to say, death is coming.
Yeah.
It'll come to all of us. We don't know when or how. So be mindful of everything you do in the moments that you have. So my question to you is, with whatever time that you have, what do you want your legacy of purpose to be in Kenya? What do you want to leave behind when people think about Philip Thigo when you're gone? What is that legacy of purpose that you want them to immediately say connected to your name?
I think for me, if the one thing that I think I do very well is to connect people, and to have created a common ground for that connectivity. That it's not that in that room it's not an ambassador who was there or a minister who was there. It was people who were in that room as humans, had a conversation, and if anything emerged from that, then that's okay. If they work together after that, that's okay. If they became friends, that's okay. But if they understood each other in the way that they know that they cannot work together, then that's okay. I think for me, that I'd be happy with that legacy. That I was able to connect humans at a very human level. Because all these things, honestly, and you've seen, and I'm sure you, even through your career, that these are roles, right? So you keep on changing roles. It's a stage.
They're roles. They're not who we are.
They're not who we are, right? So I think at the end of the day, in 50 or 60 plus years, if that human is still the same, and you're able to connect that person, and they're able to use their life experience to advance somebody else's life, then that's legacy. It's not about, tomorrow I can leave this job and I'll still be at my coffee house and take coffee and not bat an eye because nothing has changed in terms of who I am. The role is different. At that time, I'll be a coffee drinker. I'll not be an ambassador. But then for me, that's legacy. And if somebody can walk up to me and I can have that human conversation, then that would be, I think I would have achieved a lot just by that.
That's beautiful. And I know it to be true because whenever I see you, you always look at me and see what's going on with Dina.
Exactly.
I walked in here today and you said, oh, you look tired. Take a minute, have a coffee.
Exactly.
Relax.
These are papers. You'll come here and call yourself excellencies here and there. That's fine. But
we are not our roles, and they don't last forever.
They don't.
Human connection is everything.
And let me tell you, they are fleeting. Roles are fleeting, and people don't understand it. That's why when people leave these roles, nobody calls them because they were their roles. People call you because of your role. Me, you call me because I'm your friend. Even if you didn't like me, you'll still talk to me at some point, right? So, yeah. but you're not calling a role. So I hopefully for me, that's something that, and again, coming back to my mentors, right? So it's the same thing, right? That ultimately we are humans. And how we treat each other is important.
And maybe that's the key to unlocking connection in Africa.
Yeah.
Is for all of us to start seeing each other.
Exactly. I should not see somebody as a Ugandan, or a Tanzanian, and all the cliches that come with that.
And remove all the labels and the othering.
A Tanzanian it's a human being. You so happen to be Tanzanian, right? But you're still human with all your diversity. That's still Tanzanian. So let's remove the cliche, the fake stuff, and that's fluff. Ultimately, I want to talk to a Tanzanian because you're in Tanzania, and I think there's something we can do together, right?
And that's a human-to-human thing.
That's a human-to-human thing, right? So that's what happened at the borders, right? That was barter trade, right? So until somebody came up with a yardstick, we used to exchange cows and salt.
Until somebody created a border,
exactly,
like drew a line,
and said, "There's no way you can trade salt and cows."
Yeah.
But at the human level, somebody knew you have what I need and I have what I need. At the human level, can we exchange it?
And that's and you're going to change that in Africa.
Exactly. We have to do that.
We have to do it.
We have to do it.
I'm with you. Let's do it.
Dina, we really have to do it.
Thank you so much.
Because no one else will do it.
We'll do it. Thank you so much, Philip. I appreciate you and I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
And I feel very humbled to also call you a friend.
Me too. You need to move back though.
Yeah, I will. It's coming. Thank you.
You need to move back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.